Okay, here's the thing. I didn't realize that so many of the blunders and difficulties I experienced could be traced back to the impulsivity aspect of my ADHD. That is, until I worked on it in therapy. If you've ever felt like a disaster for impulse purchasing things, blurting out things that other people didn't want to hear, or doing something to affect your physical appearance or your health without having a moment to think it through, then you are definitely not alone. And today, I want to unpack the most helpful coping strategies that my therapist taught me for managing impulsivity with ADHD. If you're new here, hi, I'm Anna. I have a master's degree in neuroscience and a clinical ADHD diagnosis, and I share science-informed lifestyle strategies for living with ADHD or just a busy brain, or for those of us who are just ambitious and overwhelmed. Welcome back to Skills That Stuck, the 5-part series where I share the most helpful things I learned in therapy after my diagnosis. This is episode 2, where we'll be talking about everything to manage impulsivity, or at least what I found most helpful. But if you missed part 1, it was all about emotion regulation. So just a quick disclaimer, I am not a licensed therapist. I am not your therapist. These are just my personal learnings from what I learned in therapy. In some other content, I talk about more research findings, but this one is more of a personal journey and the skills and tools that I was taught in therapy. So what worked for me might not work for you. Please take what resonates and leave what doesn't. And all of these should be pretty safe to try, but if you know something that I don't, like if this doesn't work for people with specific disorders, then please drop that information in the comments if you do know better. I'm always willing to learn from you guys as well. But as far as I know, these should be safe for pretty much everybody to try. So as I mentioned, impulsivity is one of my biggest ADHD struggles, and it impacts my life in multiple domains, including social, where I blurt out unsolicited advice, financial, where I impulse purchase things I don't always need, and also physical, where I tend to go for impulsive, unhealthy coping strategies like picking up my skin if I get overwhelmed, or often if I break something, I will often try to fix it because I feel bad about breaking it, and I'll often end up making things worse instead of taking a moment to really think before I act. On that note, the first tool for impulsivity that I learned in therapy is called Stop, Think, Act. It was incredibly helpful for me, but please note that this tool and most of the other tools I'm going to mention do take a bit of practice, so don't feel discouraged if they're really difficult or annoying at first. They do get better with time. So step 1 is to stop. Grab a pen and a piece of paper or your notes app, and you're going to note down some things. Write down the situations where you tend to struggle with impulsivity. I found it really helpful to journal about this, to spot my recurring patterns. Like, I'm more impulsive in conversations where my hobbies and interests are the main topic. I tend to just dominate the conversation and impulsively keep talking without letting other people get a word in. I'm more impulsive with food and eating if people present me with snacks while I'm watching something, because then I'll just mindlessly eat without actually wanting to or without being hungry. I'm also impulsive in classes or conversations when my smartphone is in sight. I tend to just pick it up and check what's going on without really meaning to. And I'm also quite impulsive if my body is dysregulated and I don't notice or can't articulate that. So often if I'm dehydrated or even just thirsty, I might not realize that's the issue, and it'll lead me to impulsive behaviors like picking at my skin or like purchasing things. Now note down some things from past situations that could be warning signals for when your impulsivity could pop up. So where were you? Who else was with you? What were you feeling both physically and emotionally? And what kind of thoughts were you thinking? If you want to take this a step further, then check out the stoplight model that I mentioned in part 1, and I've also made a printable version of the stoplight model that I've left in the description for you down below. Okay, step 2 is to think. So use these 2 questions to think about how you could act more intentionally next time. So the first question is literally, how can I help myself act more intentionally? And the second question is, how can I give myself more time before responding or reacting? Now, step 3 is act. So building on those 2 questions from step 2, you can intentionally decide how to act. So for me, this looks like asking somebody if they want my opinion before I blurt it out, keeping a pocket notebook to jot down my thoughts during conversations so I don't impulsively interrupt people, and taking a second to check in with my needs before I act impulsively. And to do this, I like to use the acronym HUT, which stands for hungry or thirsty, upset, tired, or stressed. So I just check, am I hungry or thirsty? Has anything upset me? Am I tired? Did I sleep enough? Or have I been doing too much? Or am I feeling stressed? The second super helpful tool I learned is the difference between doing mode and being mode, and how to switch from doing mode into being mode. Basically, when you're in doing mode, you're feeling frantic and frazzled, and you're only focused on the outcome of a task, and therefore you're much more likely to make careless mistakes. When you switch to being mode, you become much more mindful and aware and engaged with the process, allowing you to be more accepting of the situation you're in, more resilient, more flexible, and more adaptable. So here are 3 tips to switch from doing mode into being mode. Step 1 is to intentionally decide to monotask. I know a lot of us like multitasking, but when you monotask, you can fully immerse yourself in the process of that one task and be much more mindful with it. 2 is to give yourself an intentional transition between activities. So it could be something as simple as just stopping between activities and taking a few deep breaths before you move on, or doing what I like to do, which is a technique with a fancy name that's super simple called interstitial journaling, where it's literally 2 sentences. 1 sentence is about what you just did and 1 sentence about what you're about to do next. So for example, I just filmed this YouTube video, and next I'm going to move the file from my camera onto my laptop. And tip 3 is to do a simple grounding exercise. It could be something as simple as counting backwards from 5 and really noticing the sensation of your feet on the floor. Or it could be that fun little grounding exercise of noticing 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Now, before I mention the next tool, I need you to promise me that you're not going to click off the video, and I need you to hear me out because it's mindfulness and meditation. Just wait. There is this huge myth online that people with ADHD can't meditate, and that's just simply not true. In fact, I'm pretty sure some of your favorite mindfulness creators have mentioned at some point that they also have ADHD, like Victoria Hutchins from The Daily Victorian or Jade Bowler from Unjaded Jade. And what if I told you that the fact that mindfulness and meditation are difficult for us is actually why it benefits us so much? As people with ADHD, one of our fundamental struggles is that we have difficulty regulating our attention. In a mindfulness meditation, you typically pick an anchor like your breath and you keep coming back to that anchor. A mindfulness meditation could be as short as 1 minute or as long as 20 minutes or more, depending on how much practice you've put in. But that doesn't mean staying perfectly focused for the entire duration of the meditation. So if you've tried to meditate but you keep getting frustrated because you keep getting distracted and then you give up, you're missing the point. The work and benefits of a mindfulness meditation is when we keep bringing ourselves back to that anchor after we get distracted. It is that act of bringing yourself back that strengthens the sort of meditation muscle, if you know what I mean. So it's not about how long you can consistently stay focused for, it's about the refocusing. If I haven't practiced in a while, I will start with like 1-minute meditations, but because I've been practicing for a while, I do on average like 5 minutes a day, or sometimes even longer if I'm really good about being in the habit. Now, on a similar note, the next coping tool I learned for impulsivity, which is more of a long-term practice thing, is everyday mindfulness using the awareness, choice, trust framework. So this might actually be more accessible to some people than the previous tip, because this way you don't have to intentionally carve out time to sit down and practice a meditation. You build mindfulness into your everyday. So awareness, choice, trust goes like this. It's also abbreviated to ACT, but that can get a bit confusing with some other therapies. So we'll just call it awareness, choice, trust. So awareness is pause and notice what is happening right now using your 5 senses. Choice is choose how you will respond to what is happening. And trust is trust in the choice that you have made and that you have the skills to deal with whatever comes next. So this one sounds super simple, but I promise you it really does need to be practiced. So here are some examples of where you can practice awareness, choice, trust, daily mindfulness. Alright, so before we recap, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything new from me. So today we talked about the skills and tools that I learned in therapy to help with managing impulsivity related to my ADHD. The first one we talked about was Stop, Think, Act, which helps us to pause, identify moments of impulsivity, and plan ahead for what to do next time. Then we talked about switching from frantic doing mode into more mindful being mode by choosing to monotask, by crafting transition rituals, and by practicing grounding exercises. And then lastly, we talked about 2 forms of mindfulness meditation and everyday mindfulness using the awareness, choice, trust method. If you made it to this point in the video, I would love for you to drop your favorite emoji in the comments or let me know which one of these 4 tools and frameworks you would love to try first. And if this resonated with you, you'll love the full article I wrote about it on Substack, which is linked in the description below. Thank you for hanging out with me today, and as always, stay curious, stay connected, and turn your potential into action.